I wanted to start off today with a brief overview of the types of flooding a city or a town might experience. Flash flooding is linked to heavy rainfall and can be some of the most dangerous due to the unpredictability around these type of storms. The increased percentages of impervious areas we have seen in both urban centers and suburban areas are only adding to the effects of flash flooding, as this rainfall has nowhere to go when normal drainage networks exceed their design capacity. Coastal flooding is also a significant cause of damage and one of the most devastating. Storm surge impacts carry the weight of oceans behind them and can be powered by the winds of a cyclone or hurricane. And due to the layout and geography of our country, over half the nation's economic productivity is located within these coastal zones and is potentially at risk to this type of flooding. More than 8.6 million, to be exact, in terms of population. And lastly, to look at today, river flooding. Being far away from the coast doesn't remove the risk of flood events. And riverine flooding is still the most common type of flood in the United States, according to FEMA. So it's truly a problem that encompasses the entirety of the geography of the US. And we can see that here in a map of what the most frequent FEMA natural disaster declarations have been over the past 60 to 70 years. As you can see, with the exception of all but a few, flooding from either rivers, severe storms, hurricanes, and rainfall is by far the most common and often the most costly natural hazard that many states will experience. So the harsh reality is that while some parts of the country may be getting drier, increasing the risk of fire, others, like the Midwest, continue to get wetter. Coastal storms have become more frequent as well. Between 2012 and 2017, for example, the Houston area experienced 6 major floods in just a 5-year span. So floods truly are the most common natural hazard in the United States. To add to this, claims and damages have become even costlier as time's gone on. States with over $1 billion in FEMA claims include Louisiana, Texas, New Jersey, New York, Florida, Mississippi, and North Carolina. And losses have increased to an average of at least 10 billion per year, which is a truly astounding figure. And on a nationwide scale, we can see that flooding is truly a serious issue and one that demands our attention. But it's often relayed down to individual states and communities to address these problems. Here we can see a visualization of every one of those FEMA reported flooding events in that last 20 to 40 year time span. And all of the states and towns that are experiencing these type of impacts. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Morgan Healy to take a look at our first application.
Thanks, Aaron. So today I'll be focusing on a customer story out of the state of Texas that pulls together themes of flood prediction, planning, and geospatial analysis and visualization. I'll describe some work we did with the State of Texas Water Development Board in support of their ongoing efforts to predict and plan for potential flooding events. Next slide. As some of you may know, flooding is a major issue in the state of Texas, as it is in many areas of our country. It's an issue that is dealt with at all levels of government. Federal, state, county, and local municipalities are all involved in flood-related issues. The Texas Water Development Board, or TxDOT, is focused on all aspects of flooding in the state of Texas, including planning and preparation, flood mitigation and prevention, as well as response and public support during and after a flood event. TxDOT is looking to provide key information to the general public, as well as government and public safety officials, before, during, and after a flooding event occurs. AppGeo has worked with TxDOT for several years on various geospatial projects, and in 2019, we started a proof of concept project to help demonstrate the value of building a centralized flooding information resource for the state of Texas. While TWDB is focused on all aspects of floods and flood-related issues, for this proof of concept project, we narrowed the focus to activities that needed to happen before a flooding event occurs, such as understanding what areas are likely to flood based on various water levels, and estimating property damages and population impacted for different flooding scenarios, and viewing real-time weather conditions and alerts for upcoming weather event awareness. The overarching goal of the proof of concept was to build a simple platform that supported some of these key questions and analysis in a user-friendly way. A successful proof of concept would help to demonstrate the effectiveness of these tools and help gain funding for a full build-out of the system. Next slide. So we worked with TWDB and the Texas Natural Resources Information System group to build the FloodSMART proof of concept application. We focused on 3 core functions to demonstrate the value of this platform. First, to display current weather and weather alerts from various sources such as NOAA and the National Weather Service. Second, to provide tools for users to interactively view and analyze flood inundation modeling data. And third, to estimate potential property damages and the number of people impacted by the flood inundation. Again, this is all about flood prediction, understanding what could happen, what might be coming. Next slide. To build this platform, we split the tools and functions into 2 separate but related interfaces. The first is shown here and is a simple mapping dashboard that gives users access to all kinds of real-time weather information, including radar, flood gauge levels, drought information, hurricane updates, wind conditions, and current temperatures. Any weather alerts specific to a user's location are displayed on the right. A user can easily toggle between different weather layers to get a sense of current weather conditions in their area or across an entire region or state. Next slide. The application is intuitive and user-friendly. As a user switches layers, simple legends display to provide further information about the map. Weather alerts are clickable to get additional detailed information and a full description of that alert. This real-time weather conditions viewer pulls all relevant information together in one simple dashboard so that users can access all of the weather and flooding-related information they might need. This information will enable them to understand the dynamic characteristics of a potential upcoming flooding event. Next slide. The second interface built within the FloodSMART application is the Flood Inundation Viewer. This viewer provides a user with intuitive tools to help predict flooding impacts, such as being able to interactively increase or decrease the water levels to view flood modeling inundation data on the map. This inundation data indicates areas that would be flooded at various water levels. Users are also given estimated property damage amounts and the total number of people potentially impacted by a flooding event. The estimated damages are based on building values in the property data. Depending on the inundation and water depth that covers a certain parcel, the application is actually calculating a percentage of that building value. So based on how flooded that area may or may not be at a various water level, that's how for the potential estimated damages. Next slide. In this short animation.
And Morgan, I would actually just like to take this time to make a quick announcement. We've had many people who have just joined us. Thank you all for joining us today. We do want to make a reminder to everybody that this is really staying at a high level. We will stay as long as it takes to answer as many questions as you have. So if you have more specific or technical questions that relate more towards whatever it is that you do, please feel free to ask those in the questions box and we will get to them at the end of the session, I'm sorry. But once again, we want to thank everybody for joining us and we encourage you to ask as many questions as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jordan. And that's exactly right. There's a lot going on behind this application and in the other things that we'll show you, and we'll be happy to dive into that later if there's other questions. So this is kind of playing a little animation on loop, you'll see, and I'll sort of speak to it. You can just kind of watch it. It'll sort of play over and over again. So in this little animation that you'll notice that the user can easily interact with this map. They can zoom in and pan to find the area they're most interested in. They could also search for an address and jump to a certain location. Once they're focused on their area of interest, a user can easily change the water depth with the slider on the right. As the slider is changed, you'll notice that the map updates immediately to display the flood inundation area at that water level. Also, as the map updates, you'll notice that the property damage estimates and number of people impacted changes as well based on that inundation. These tools are easy to use, and the information displayed is updated on the fly based on the current map extent and user-defined water level. The data behind this map is actually fairly complex and is generated using highly technical flood modeling processes and software. Typically, this flood modeling data is only accessible for GIS staff or other technical personnel, and it's challenging for non-technical public officials to access and view this important data in a self-service way. This application solves that problem. This tool and map views get this critical flood modeling data into the hands of those who need it. With a tool like this, public officials can easily and quickly view and assess potential flooding impacts and carry out planning and preparation activities accordingly, including evacuation and response planning. Next slide. And the good news is that the FloodSMART proof of concept application was a success. It helped to demonstrate to TWDB and to state of Texas officials that there is great value in this type of flooding analysis application. This work has helped to secure funding that will support flood preparation, mitigation, and response, all topics that we'll continue to talk about in the rest of this webinar. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Aaron, and he's going to speak a little bit about flood preparation.
Great, thanks, Morgan. Next, I'd like to discuss how cities and towns are using data to more accurately prepare, strengthening communities with both the knowledge and technical tools necessary for decision making. I wanted to share this quote, which I think is very applicable when it comes to flooding data as well. Data can give you answers, but only if you ask the right questions. We're very fortunate to be living in a time when computational processing power and storage tends not to be the limiting factor, but instead it's how we can apply these vast amount of data to that we suddenly have access to the questions that will really make a difference. Geospatial technology is really unique in that it can tie all these factors together, the what, where, and when, and help guide our decision making. So what's at stake? When it comes to resiliency planning, there can be a lot more to it than meets the eye. Beyond getting people out of harm's way, we often are left with costly impacts to infrastructure of all types. For example, when Hurricane Sandy flooded Lower Manhattan in 2012, the costs to repair flooded transit infrastructure quickly soared into the billions. So beyond just residents and property, we have to consider transit networks, environmental resources, public safety, cultural resources, as well as all of the town-owned infrastructure, utilities, and so much more. I'd like to share an example from a bit closer to home here in Gloucester, Massachusetts, which is just 30 miles north of Boston, where we are now. Being a historic coastal city of about 30,000 people, Gloucester has seen more than a few storms in its nearly 400-year history. With that said, coastal storms have in many cases worsened and become more frequent. With much of the population residing directly by the waterfront, as you can see in our aerial above, Gloucester has been proactive in their approach to flood management and analysis. The City of Gloucester has been working with the support of the Massachusetts Office of Coastal Zone Management to better understand our current and future risk from flooding and coastal storms, and measures that may be taken to better prepare the community. Some of the tools that they've used for this effort include the existing FEMA flood zones, the NOAA SLOSH hurricane model, and the 2030 and 2070 flood scenario layers, which I'll talk about here in a moment. So under the hood of this effort is an enhanced flooding model that was developed in part by research firm Woods Hole Group here in Massachusetts. This advanced model simulates the effects of tides, storm surge, wind, waves, river discharge, sea level rise for current and future climate scenarios. It also considers the local bathymetry and topography to evaluate the exact probability and depth of flooding for any particular area at a very high spatial resolution. And all of this data is hosted on on a publicly accessible site called MapGeo for the city of Gloucester. And you can see a screenshot of that here. The output of this model, after various refinements and revisions, is available to both city staff and the public at large through MapGeo's cloud mapping platform. By bringing all parcel records, roads, and critical infrastructure onto one platform, a user can quickly get a sense for what might be at risk under both existing and future scenarios. For example, understanding the impacts to a particular water or sewer pump station in the event of a flood may be key to keeping these crucial services online and understanding where redundancy and backups need to be implemented. From a planning perspective, Gloucester took this data one step further and used it as the basis for revising their evacuation zone map. The previous data layer used for evacuations was statewide and developed by MEMA, the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency. Because this data was based on larger census blocks as its geography, it had the issue of both overstating evacuation needs while potentially missing other areas due to the lack of specificity. So Gloucester wanted to take their enhanced flooding data and use it to improve their evacuation zone planning. So this improved analysis examined flooding impacts on the tax parcel level, of which Gloucester has approximately 13,000. By evaluating the impacts to both buildings and properties at this scale, we can more adeptly identify the individuals who are most at risk and therefore should be the first to evacuate. From a data perspective, this improvement took us from 780 census blocks citywide and improved the resolution by a factor of about 16 times. By linking these tables to assessor data, we can also generate more accurate summary tables, determine exactly what properties are at risk, and summarize their potential value and even inhabitants. This can provide planners with more accurate population counts to better facilitate evacuation operations, staging, and emergency management in the event of a natural disaster. Secondly, another improvement from this approach was the ability to identify and address these access compromise zones. These are areas of higher ground that, while might remain unflooded, become impossible to get in or out of due to roadway flooding cutting them off from the rest of the network. So as you can see this image here as an example, not from Gloucester, an example of where properties might be technically unflooded, but completely isolated. Oh, no? Great. Sorry for the disruption there. So again, these are areas of the city that might not necessarily have flooding on them, but will be totally cut off due to roadway flooding. And what's really interesting is that in many cases, the fatalities that can occur in these tragic events are often not the direct result of floodwater, but rather due to the isolation and detachment from critical services such as fire, EMS, pharmacies, and in some cases even food. And this is especially true among vulnerable populations such as the elderly, who may have a harder time evacuating in the first place. So building this into the analysis was a really crucial step that I hope other cities can learn from as well. And GIS methodologies such as network analysis can help us automatically detect such areas at scale. Good. And lastly, sometimes our very best data doesn't come as the output of a model or algorithm. By involving community members in the planning process, we can tap into decades worth of experience from those individuals who have firsthand accounts with the town's infrastructure and at-risk areas. By using an approach that combines the knowledge of city leaders, DPW staff, emergency management, fire and police, as well as residents, we can shape our models with real-world historical observations to better allow them to inform what the future might bring. For example, a DPW crew might know very well that a particular bridge in town can flood should the culvert underneath it become blocked with debris, whereas according to a flood model, the rated diameter of the pipe underneath could be fine for the volume of water expected. And it's combining this local knowledge that's an invaluable part of the process. Oh, and here you can see an example of that isolation. So what does this all look like in summary? On the left, you can see the original evacuation zones, and on the right, the revised plan, with the green areas designated Zone A, which are the first to evacuate and most critical at risk, and B being secondary areas, which might be at a slightly lower risk, but still should be evacuated in certain circumstances. The original evacuation zones were revised to provide a greater accuracy to the plan, both by removing large swaths of unaffected land, but also transitioning some properties from Zone B to Zone A, which is the higher priority. Here you can see the original, and here is the revised plan with the parcel level detail. This process resulted in a more accurate evacuation plan based on real-world data as well as projected data. The better resolution and reflection of local conditions and flooding history has empowered both citizens and emergency managers to be better prepared for evacuations. Lastly, I want to touch on how cities and towns can use this improved knowledge in their decision-making when it comes to infrastructure. Typically, funds for these type of projects are limited. So by directing resources to the most critical assets, which exist at the intersection of vulnerability, risk, and consequence of failure, will bring the greatest return on investment. For example, it would be impractically expensive to surround the entire city with a seawall. But perhaps by constructing flood barriers in key locations that prevent a major thoroughfare from flooding, for example, we can protect millions of dollars of assets and prevent the sort of asset restrictions and access restrictions that may cut off a whole section of town from access to, say, fire, police, or other emergency services. With improved data quality and processes for extracting meaningful information from it, these tough decisions are getting a little easier for city managers, city engineers, and planners. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Matt Hyland for the next section of the webinar.
Okay, thank you, Aaron, and thank you again to all our attendees. I really wish that this last section was called Prevent, but the reality is that despite our best efforts, we will experience more catastrophic weather events. When these events happen, we need to make sure that our information systems can deliver timely information to everyone who needs it. To do this, we need to build geospatial IT systems that are scalable, available, adaptable, shareable, and up to date. Following slides tell one story about how this was accomplished. Next. In 2014, the Texas Department of Transportation hired AppGeo to rebuild Drive Texas, the state's public-facing highway condition system. On a tight time frame of only a few months, AppGeo re-architected, rebuilt, and deployed the system. The new design and software stack solved several core deficiencies, including performance, reliability, scalability, and functionality. Next. Then, on August 25th, 2017, Hurricane Harvey made landfall as a Category 4 hurricane near Rockport, Texas. Next. In addition to extensive wind and tidal surge damage in the Rockport area, the storm meandered through southeast Texas for 4 days, dropping up to 60 inches of rainfall in some areas. It is tied with Hurricane Katrina as the costliest tropical cyclone in history, primarily because of the widespread severe flooding. Next. With more than 500 state roadway closures during the height of Hurricane Harvey, Drive Texas was visited over 5 million times as drivers searched to check road conditions, find alternate routes, and see closures on state roadways. Site usage spiked from an average of 1,000 sessions per day to more than 700,000 sessions per day. Scalability, redundancy, and automatic failovers are inherent in the Google Cloud Platform hardware infrastructure. But just in case of a software failure, Drive Texas can switch to a static failover system in Amazon Web Services. The data in the backup system are refreshed less frequently, but this allows Drive Texas to continually provide some information to users even if the primary system is down. Of course, every emergency is different, and each one may find users trying different combinations of features and uses. Regardless of our extensive testing, any system is susceptible to newly found bugs during periods of high use. Having the development vendor on call 24/7 is important to allow quickly addressing any issues that may arise. Next. Drive Texas uses adaptive design and cross-platform integration to facilitate feature enhancement, ingestion of additional services, and sharing of services. Drive Texas integrates Google, Amazon Web Services, MapLarge, Esri, and other geospatial and non-spatial technologies. Each component plays a different but critical role. Whether you do your application development in-house or hire a consultant, having a vendor-independent design approach allows you to build systems that use the best fit technologies for your specific needs. Drive Texas also uses Google Analytics to track numbers of sessions, how users are accessing the site, and numbers of new and returning users. This information then feeds into planning for system enhancements. Again, every emergency is different, and each one may find response teams looking for different data or functionality. In addition to an adaptable system architecture, having the development vendor on call 24/7 is important to allow adding and modifying data and features at a moment's notice. Next.
Oh, thank you, Matt. And now that it's just past 2:30 Eastern Time, I just want to make a quick reminder, the last reminder, as some folks have just joined us, to ask questions as they come to you during the course of this session, and we're going to go to that Q&A session at the end. So we're going to hit Q&A in about 10 or 15 minutes. I really encourage you guys to light that questions box up. And back to you, Matt.
Okay, thank you, Jordan. Now, road conditions in Texas are collected by TxDOT field employees using the Highway Conditions Reporting System. These data are published to Drive Texas every 5 minutes. Drive Texas uses Google Maps API to integrate traffic, geocoding, and routing, and to provide a familiar look and feel in the base maps. The Drive Texas Emergency Planning website provides evacuation route information for the state of Texas, with potential contraflow and evacuate locations and access points. In the event that contraflow or evacuate lanes are activated or deactivated, they are automatically displayed or removed as current conditions on Drive Texas. In the near future, TxDOT plans to add more live data feeds such as NOAA weather, USGS water level gauges, and others, further enhancing the timeliness of the information delivered to Drive Texas users. Next. So how does geospatial IT help protect us? Geospatial IT can help by building resilient information systems. Resilient systems are scalable, available, adaptable, shareable, and up-to-date. Resilient systems are easy to use, employ the best tools for each of their many jobs, and provide the right data to the right people at the right time. Of course, these points are applicable to just about any data management system, but they are particularly salient for tools that are used to protect public safety. AppGeo strives to adhere to these principles for all of our geospatial IT applications. Next. In conclusion, the bad news is that the frequency and severity of weather events will probably continue to increase, and all the current records for the worst hurricanes, floods, fires, earthquakes, etc. will probably be broken. The good news is that humans are getting smarter, our technology and connectivity is getting better, and funding is available for both technological and non-technological projects related to severe weather events. During Hurricane Harvey, Drive Texas aided first responders in identifying open roads so they could direct citizens to safety and guide response personnel to critical areas. The system was featured on several news broadcasts to inform the public of flooding and road closures. During recovery, it was widely used by the public to determine the best routes to get to their loved ones and property. The real-time updates provided by Drive Texas were widely praised. However, as mentioned earlier, several opportunities for improvement have been identified and others are likely to be discovered. So maybe you have some ideas for improving on what you've seen here, or perhaps you'd like to adapt some of these ideas to your own area. If so, we would love to hear from you. Together, we can improve our collective abilities to predict, prepare for, and protect from the next major severe weather event.